Bishop 349U. A dispute also arose among them as to which of them was considered to be greatest. Jesus said to them, "The kings of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who exercise authority over them call themselves benefactors." Luke 22, 24 through 27.
But you are not to be like that. Instead, the greatest among you should be like the youngest, and the one who rules like the one who serves. For who is greater, the one who is at the table or the one who serves? Is it not the one who is at the table? But I am among you as one who serves.
All right. You go next slide here. In 1992, Pepsi held a promotional contest in the Philippines called Pepsi Number Fever. So the Philippines were a huge market for the soda industry, but Coke was dominating there. So Pepsi wanted to absorb more of that market share, so they printed numbers on bottle caps, and winning numbers could be turned in for cash prizes. So there were 2 grand prizes, and each of the grand prizes was for 1 million pesos. Now, at that time, 1992, 1 million pesos was equivalent to about 50 years of an average Filipino's salary. So imagine getting 50 years of your salary. I mean, that's like Powerball lottery kind of wealth. Well, the night finally arrived when the winning numbers were announced, and everybody in the Philippines was excited. Millions of families all over the country huddled around their TVs, clutching their soda caps tightly in their hands to see if they would hit it rich. With dramatic flair, the news anchor announced the magical number. "Ladies and gentlemen, children of all ages, the winning number is 349. At that moment, the winners leapt for joy, and they ran into the street to celebrate and share the news with their neighbors, only to see those same neighbors running into the street also leaping for joy. But what are the chances of neighbors both winning the grand prize? Unfortunately, that same scene played out thousands of times all over the country. You see, guys, it turns out that Pepsi made a printing error. And instead of 2 winners, there were actually 800,000 winners. Hordes of Filipinos descended on Pepsi bottling plants, caps in hand, ready to claim their winnings. And sadly, Pepsi's leadership handbook said, "Appease the masses if possible, while maximizing profits." That's what Pepsi is all about. And so they decided to give each winner $18. Imagine thinking that you had won generational wealth only to be given $18. Well, the country descended into chaos. Boycotts and protests turned into riots. 37 Pepsi delivery trucks were destroyed by vandals. Pepsi executives received death threats. Someone even threw a grenade into a Pepsi warehouse, and a homemade bomb was tossed at a Pepsi truck. All together in those attacks, 5 people died. The winning number, 349, became associated with the incident. You can go to the next slide there. It became associated with it so much so that it became slang. To be 349 meant to be duped or deceived. That's what those numbers mean, right? Kids today are all like 6'7", 6'7", and my kids can't even tell me what it means. Sorry, everybody. Sorry, they don't even know what it means. 349 was that number in the Philippines, right? And it means to be duped or deceived. Unfortunately, Pepsi handled this scandal poorly because Pepsi doesn't really care about anybody. They care about the bottom line. So here's my question for you to answer at your tables. What should the church learn from Pepsi's mistake? Go ahead and share your thoughts at your table for the next couple minutes. Well, hopefully you came up with lots of good things. You solved all of the problems of the church in the last 3 minutes, hopefully. So, sadly, guys, many churches and church leaders operate just like Pepsi. They operate like a business. It's all about the bottom line of butts, bucks, and buildings, right? The priorities for so many churches are attendance, right? Everything is counted every week. Everybody's counted, and then they keep track of it. They have meetings about it, right? If that number's going up, they meet and they talk, and everybody gives themselves a pat on the back. Not for real, right? But, basically that's what happens. If it's going down, then the whole meeting, what do we do about this, right? So the priorities, attendance, financial contributions, physical facilities, that's what most churches focus all of their attention on. It's the world that uses those metrics to measure success. And unfortunately, the church has been 349'd by the world's definition of success. Those priorities even sucked in Jesus' closest followers who walked with him for 3.5 years. So verse 24 sets the direction of our lesson today. It says, an argument broke out among the disciples as to which one of them should be thought of as the greatest. How crazy is this? It actually is worse than we realize when we just read this small section. It's important whenever we're reading the Bible and studying it that we read the context. Does anybody know the context of where this argument took place? Anybody have any ideas?
Last Supper?
Last Supper. There you go, Michael. Jesus had just set down the towel that he used to wash the disciples' feet, taking on the role of the lowliest servant. And as if missing that completely, the disciples jockey for position. Jesus was about to go to the cross. He was about to carry out the most humbling, selfless act in the history of the world, while the disciples are locking horns about who's the GOAT. But guys, guess what? This wasn't the first time that they brought this whole thing up. Back in Luke chapter 9, right after another major event, the transfiguration of Jesus, right after that, they got into the same exact argument. Guys, think about this. Jesus had already addressed this exact topic with them, and yet they completely missed his countercultural example in teaching, because everything in our world is about who's the greatest, who's the GOAT, right? And everybody wants to be thought of as the greatest that there is, right? So it's a good thing that we've learned this lesson, right? I mean, we've been Christians for a long time, so we've really learned it. I mean, there's no problems here with selfish ambition and pride, right? Actually, guys, the disciples had a huge advantage over us because they said the quiet part out loud, which was super helpful, because then Jesus was able to address it directly and clearly. In the modern church, we get a lot better at hiding prideful attitudes, right? We've learned that being subtle about ambitions of greatness, it's much better look to be subtle about it, to hide it. Guys, I have struggled with this, right? So I have not struggled in game playing. That's who I'm going to be, game playing. That's not what we're talking about. Right? We are not talking about the reading of the scores, everybody. We're talking about real life. And there have been times, many years ago, I was leading worship for one of maybe the fastest growing church in the area at that time. And we had top-notch everything. At the time, I really believed, I was young, much younger, I really believed that I was part of the equation that led to such amazing success in the church. I remember standing on stage leading worship one day, and the band sounded awesome. I mean, we had great sound guys, we had great equipment, everything was amazing. And this thought crossed my mind. My wicked heart said just internally, wow, you are really good at this, Jason. Guys, right in the middle of declaring the greatness of Jesus in song, my heart was declaring my own greatness. And thankfully, the Holy Spirit convicted me immediately, and I repented in my heart. And I wish that I could say that that thought never returned, but it has a couple times. And I think that it has because the whole system of the church has been modeled after secular society. The church has become a business where I need to prove my worth to the organization in order to justify my salary. And we've built this entire Christian culture obsessed with leading rather than following. Obsessed with being served instead of serving. The disciples argued over greatness at the table, and then we went thousands of years later and we turned it into an entire industry. Leadership education and development is a $50 billion industry. And I don't think it's the direction that Jesus intended for the church. But this is subtly promoted by many in our church circles. For instance, I'll give you a story here. This is a really interesting story. When I first started working at the big church that was growing and had everything, I saw a mess in the building that somebody else must have missed. And so I went over and cleaned it up. And one of the leaders of the church stopped me, noticed what I was doing, and stopped me. And this is what the leader said. He said, Jason, we don't pay you to do that. You have special skills, and we need you to focus your efforts on what we hired you to do. Your job isn't cleaning up here. What do you think that taught the young, self-centered version of me? It taught me that there are tasks that are beneath me, right? And yeah, message received loud and clear, right? Like, I'm more important than the janitor. But guys, I was being 349. And God had a sense of humor. He was like, Jason, I'm going to take you away from this giant church where you don't have to clean up anything. And I'm going to send you to a church where you got to clean up everything. Because Jesus said, for it is the one who is least among you who is the greatest. Guys, did you know? Listen to this. Like I said, you are never going to find a Christian conference on servanthood. You will find Christian conferences everywhere on leadership. Do you know that the word leadership or leader is found in the New Testament 6 times? The word servant appears more than 200 times. Which do you think is the more important skill to learn? That is why we need to strive to be servants. I love how some of you do that here. Some of you, when our service is over, you make a beeline for the vacuum cleaner. And some of you go around to tables that adults have left all their junk on, and you clean up some other adult's stuff. Right? A few of you even come early and help me set up the room and clean up from what other people didn't clean up. That's the kind of leadership that Jesus modeled. In our passage, Jesus gave 2 characteristics of worldly leadership and 2 characteristics of godly servanthood. Those 4 points are going to be our main points in the lesson today. Some of the ideas that I'm sharing today, I grabbed from a book called Unleader by Lance Ford. I encourage you guys to grab a copy of it if you want to get a more comprehensive picture of what it looks like to live as a servant rather than focusing all your time and attention on leadership. All right, so here we go. Point number 1 is the world's leadership playbook. The world says power over people. This comes from verse 25. Jesus said, the kings of the Gentiles lord it over them. Worldly leaders assert their authority and their dominance over people. They use their power and influence to get people to do what is in their own best interest, in the leader's best interest. And we see examples of that all throughout the leadership of our country. Guys, politicians who enter public service broke come out as multi-millionaires all the time. Big name preachers in this country do the exact same thing. Guys, the American culture trains boys and churches to believe that it's the strong man that saves the day, right? Even the titles, the words we use, the Lone Ranger, Lone, Han Solo, right? That myth has seeped into the church. That people today think that the pastor is the visionary, the anointed one, the fearless pioneer, the king who builds the kingdom. That's exactly what the disciples think. Right? They want to know which of us is the Han Solo, which is, the Lone Ranger, who's the hero of the story. And they're like, it must be one of us. The problem is that human ego cannot handle kingly power. Honestly, guys, most Christians want to know how they can get their name on Taylor's leadership slide instead of just picking up a mop. The role of hero has already been filled. And incredibly, it's the guy holding the tower. Jesus is the only hero in the story. So let's make sure that we don't exchange the basin and towel of servant for the scepter and crown of king. Don't be 349 by our natural sinful tendency to step on others in order to elevate ourselves. Here's my question for you about that. Paul said, the eye cannot say to the hand, I don't need you. What would you guess are some servanthood roles that need to be filled at this church? Go ahead and just share some of your thoughts at the table with others out loud. All right. So this is great. In question number 1, you solved all of the problems for the church at large. And in question number 2, you solved all Sozo's problems, right? There we go. All right. Here's point number 2 in the world's leadership playbook. It says image over integrity. Check out what Jesus says in verse 25. He says, those who exercise authority over people call themselves benefactors. Now, I love that. That's ridiculous. I mean, because you've got to be pretty conceited to give yourself a title or a nickname, right? Like, I'm the benefactor, right? There have been a bunch of egomaniacs throughout history who've given themselves nicknames. So Mussolini gave himself the nickname Il Deuce, which means the leader. Hey, Benito, I got to take a deuce. Oops. That's how you get your head lopped off, right? Stalin's birth name was actually Jogashvili, and he changed it to Stalin because that sounded much cooler, and it meant Man of Steel. This dude thought he was Superman, right? Or the best one, Idi Amin. He's a Ugandan dictator from the 70s. He gave himself the title, Lord of all the beasts of the earth and fishes of the sea. If this dude was still alive, he would be fairly disappointed to know that I never heard of him before writing this letter. And I'm pretty sure the beasts of the fields and the fishes of the sea never heard of him either. Right? But guys, those medals are awesome. Right? That's the world's leadership playbook right there. They put on the mask of strength, confidence, and power. We've seen this image-based style of leadership fail over and over and over in the church. Some of the biggest named church leaders have had the curtain yanked back and were exposed as frauds. Unfortunately, that is the culture of the modern church. The church is desperate to follow a false image of a perfect leader. Guys, I think I shared this with you once before, but when I was in seminary, my professors suggested that I should not become friends with any of you. And I was like literally, honestly, given the same exact advice from the church leaders that I served with in my first ministry. And the reason is because they understood the principle that familiarity breeds contempt. What is the root word of familiarity? Listen to what Jesus said about this in Mark 6. He says, one who speaks for God is respected everywhere, but in his own country and among his own family and in his own house. Guys, that is absolutely prophetic, because what I and other church leaders have experienced is that some of the most vicious attacks on our character have come from our own relatives and the people that are closest to us. Guys, I literally have relatives who have no problem respecting any other church leader except for one. That's why my mentors told me not to become actual friends with you guys. Because people are much more likely to respect someone that they don't really know than someone they're close with. Let me see if I can explain. It's probably self-explanatory. Like if I'm way up here, it's much easier for me to project an image of competency and superiority and success. But if people know you, they know the real you, if they play board games with you, then they realize you're just a normal, flawed person just like everybody else. And here's the key. I've only met a few church leaders, mainly in the missional world, that were willing to do that. Most of the church leaders I know at all the other churches, in the main, regular, normal, traditional churches, they all keep their distance. That way, everybody maintains their idealized image and keeps the respect flowing. But here's what I want to tell you. That is not actual respect. Think about this principle. You can't respect a false image of someone. Right? Think about that. If you don't actually know the person, you can't really respect this false image that you see up on a platform. I love this quote. You've heard this quote before. John Ortberg said, "The irony is that I hide because I'm afraid that if the full truth about me is known, that I won't be loved. But whatever is hidden cannot be loved. I can only be loved to the extent that I am known. I can only be fully loved if I am fully known." Guys, that principle is the exact same when it comes to respect. People who choose to hide behind a false image aren't really respected because people can't respect what they don't really know. Especially if all they know is that fictional public persona. So I rejected the advice that my mentors gave me, and I chose to invite most of you guys into my life to see the real, to take off the Batman mask, right? And some of you guys, some of you are acquainted with my shortcomings, and you respect me despite my flaws, as I do you, because that's real love, that's real respect. But there will be people who don't, and they're just looking for a fake leader that they can put on a pedestal until something comes out that shows that they're not really the perfect person, right? And honestly, guys, Leah and I have struggled with this for most of our years in ministry. Thankfully, not nearly as much in this church, because we built something different. But my wife became friends with ladies from churches that we were part of in the past. And Leah built enough of a rapport with some of them that she felt comfortable sharing her heart. Because if you put on that fake persona, who do we talk to? As soon as my wife mentioned something that she was upset with me about, numerous friends responded with a sanctimonious, "What? How could Jason do such a thing? He's a church leader. He should know better." And right there, conversation over. Friendship squashed because Leah realized that this person had no interest in journeying with her in real life. These women just wanted to maintain their church fantasy. Do people really think that church leaders don't argue with their wives? That we don't get on each other's nerves? Do you think that we don't have conflicts? Church leaders are normal people who struggle and have flaws just like everybody else. And yet, God wants us to respect them. So all of that is the world's leadership playbook. In verse 26, Jesus said, "But you are not to be like that." And so let's shift gears here. This is Jesus' servanthood playbook, which says, humility over honor. Jesus says, instead, the greatest among you should be like the youngest. Now, we don't necessarily think of young as being the opposite of great in our culture. But in the first century, the youngest often had the lowliest status. In that society, authority increased with age. The older you were, the more honor was given. Prominent seats at the table were given to people who were older. Even the word elder became synonymous with leader, which was adopted by the church. Young people had a much lower status in that society. Think of the birthright and the blessing being given to the firstborn, right? That's highlighted in the Jacob and Esau story. Or think about Jesse choosing not to include David when Samuel came to anoint the new king of Israel. And then sending David on an errand to bring his brother's food at the battle. That's what the youngest did. They were the servant. You might remember Gideon asking God how he could save his people because he was the youngest and the lowliest in his family, even though he's probably a young adult at the time. First century Israel was deeply rooted in the honor-shame culture, so status was everything. To willingly relinquish status was unheard of. But it's exactly what Jesus models for us and instructs us to do. We should act like the youngest, who's sent to run errands, who's sent to serve others. Every day, ask yourself the question, how can I elevate somebody else today instead of myself? How can I serve someone else today? I read a story about a teenager who wanted to go to college, but her heart sank when she read this question on the application. The question was, are you a leader? Well, being both honest and straightforward, she wrote no. And she returned the application fearing the worst. To her surprise, she received this letter from the college. Dear applicant, a study of the applications we've received this year reveals that our college will have 1,452 new freshman leaders. We are accepting you because we feel that it's imperative that they have at least one follower. There are times for all of us to lead in various roles, but sometimes we become so focused on leadership that we forget our first responsibility is to be followers. Followers of Jesus. The first command that Jesus gave to his disciples was follow me. And that same is true for us. There is no way to be a successful, victorious Christian without first walking in the footsteps of Jesus, of following. So don't be 349 into thinking that greatness is defined by status instead of humility. All right, and here's the last point. Number 2 in Jesus' servanthood playbook is service over self. In verse 26, Jesus said, the one who leads should be like one who serves. And that's pretty straightforward, right? I saw an awesome example of this a little while ago with Sozo. And I see examples like this. There's more than one that I could highlight. But one that I noticed specifically was at our Super Bowl party, Sozo Super Bowl party, just like a month and a half ago. For various reasons, guys, we only had 7 Sozo people attend that party, besides the Hines. But more than 50 guests came to that party. And 40 of them were homeless friends that came from Reach Out. Here's what I want you to think about. 7 Sozo people provided all the party food for more than 50 adult visitors. What a great example of serving. My encouragement to you is keep your eyes open. See a need, fill a need. Don't be 349 by believing that leadership is expressed through power rather than sacrifice. Jesus said, I am among you as one who serves. If the head of the church self-identifies as a servant, what are we doing obsessing over leadership? In 1992, when the numbers went wrong in the Philippines, Pepsi had a choice. They could protect the people or they could protect the profits. And when the cost got too high, they chose the bottom line. Because that's how the world leads. The world says protect yourself. Jesus says pour yourself out. The world says climb higher. Jesus walks toward a cross. Pepsi avoided the cost. Jesus chose to absorb the cost, to pay the cost. They fought to save money. He gave his life to save people. And here's the question for us tonight. When following Jesus becomes costly, when serving others costs us comfort, reputation, or control, will we protect the brand or will we protect the people? The greatest in the kingdom of heaven is not the one at the head of the table. It's the one holding the towel. So your mission this week, should you choose to accept it, is to make a commitment in your heart to pray each morning, asking God to reveal one way that you can serve somebody in the next 24 hours. If nothing comes to your mind, that's fine. If something does come to your mind, which I suspect it will, I want you to write it down in your journal or the notes app on your phone. And then I want you to review that list at the end of the week to see how you did at embracing servanthood over leadership. We have one more question that I'd like you to answer while the band comes up and closes with a song here. The question is, if greatness in the kingdom is defined by serving, how should that reshape how we choose leaders, evaluate success, and measure growth? How does that change things? Go ahead and share your thoughts at your time.